Slack. If you've interacted on GitHub, then maybe we've spoken already. Hello. If you're new to Maestro, then you're doubly welcome. Let me crack on with the Maestro side of stuff. So what is Maestro? Maestro is an open source testing framework that interacts with device APIs. When you're looking at mobile tests, you're interacting with device APIs, reading the screen, reading the elements that exist there. It means that Maestro doesn't know anything about your app, doesn't care what language you've built in, what frameworks you've used. There's no special builds going on. And Maestro Studio is another piece of free software that you can download, run on a desktop, used for authoring and for executing your tests. Maestro seems to be doing rather well. There are some surprisingly big names out there using Maestro every single day for their tests. Microsoft, DoorDash, Kraken, DuckDuckGo. They're great. You can go and read their tests. They're all open source for their Android app. If you've tuned in today, I should probably let you know what it is I'm planning on doing. I'm going to start from the very beginning with an empty workspace in Maestro Studio. I'm going to build up a set of tests for an application. I'm then going to restructure them and make them ready for CI. So we're going to go from beginning to end in, we've got an hour, but I'm hoping I'm going to get it done in about 40 minutes and leave some time for Q&A at the end. Let me switch to a screen share and we can get cracking. So fingers crossed you can.
While Dan's doing that real quick, I'll be monitoring questions and interrupting you, Dan, in case anything's relevant. But yeah, I'm Jake, one of the co-founders here too. Excited to dive in here. I'm excited to have everybody. Carry on, sir.
Cracking. So, we're looking at Maestro Studio, and we're looking at an Android emulator here. Android emulator is running the Blue Sky app. I've picked Blue Sky for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm hoping it's a format that's relatively familiar to most people that people are going to get. Number two, like, this is an app that I grabbed off of GitHub. Anything that I do today, you are going to be able to follow along and do exactly the same thing yourself to prove that, like, this isn't flim flam. Also, Blue Sky and Maestro users, if you want, you can go and have a look at their tests in GitHub too. Initially, we've got nothing connected. I've got an empty folder open and no device connected. If I go ahead and connect to the emulator, what we're going to get here is inside Maestro Studio, we have now got a mirror of that Android emulator running there. Before we get cracking, I want to do some boring testing theory. So if you come from a unit testing background, you'll be really, really familiar with things like arrange, act, assert. We start by setting our state, we then perform an interaction, then we move on to let's run some assertions. Where you're dealing with mobile operating systems, your control of state in the arrange step is absolutely an illusion. You will absolutely try to control state. You will sometimes fail. You will have a test that runs 1,000 times perfectly, then fails once because a notification appears at a random point. At the same time, part of having and maintaining your tests is that you iterate towards a greater state of control. The reason I'm mentioning lots of boring testing theory is that in practice, you also consider how you control state. Your application, you want predictability in your testing. There are plenty of places out there that will talk about we can just use AI to generate tests, and by and large, testers like predictability. I want the same thing every single time. And that's also going to apply to you and how you approach your testing, because your app needs to be able to have its state written, and it needs to be able to have its state read when you're doing your assertions. If you have a series of flows where you end up with random pop-ups, or where you have stateful infrastructure where I run a test once, but when I run it a second time, the server remembers who I am, and you then need to invest in APIs to be able to set that state, to be able to have good, reliable tests that you can run again and again and again and again. A lot of it you just manage through good tests, but occasionally you do invest in your good apps, good infrastructure. Again, Blue Sky, having played with it a few times, I think they are a good way of the way there. Let's get cracking with the first really simple test. So if I'm going to just hit the new test button, and let's call this simple. And then in the drop down, I'm going to go there. We've got Blue Sky there, picked off the device. And so you start off with a template. Now, I have cheated by logging into Blue Sky already. I'm not going to clear the state for every test, mostly so you guys don't have to watch the login happen at the beginning of every test outright. If I hover over this device picker here, you're going to see that all of these things are all elements that Maestro is picking up. And again, this is all coming from Android APIs under the hood. If I go a little bit slower, you can see there's some places we can see it's got coordinates. We do not use coordinates in good tests. As soon as you change the size of the screen, there's coordinates now. Tap somewhere else. That's not good. Here, if I move out slightly, the container that holds that, you can see there's got an ID. And we can also move slightly again, and there we go. We've got text. So that is probably a piece of accessibility text that Blue Sky, because they're good people, have put in. So if you're using a screen reader, you can still use the app. And that's going to happen all over the place. So we go to this new post button. There we go. That's got both text and an ID and coordinates. And all we're going to be doing as we build up our app. So let's start building our first test. So let's do that. Let's right click there. I'm going to run an insert. That's then going to flip the screen over, and we'll go here, and we go, great. And let's have an assertion on there, insert that. And that is our first test. With a clean app, when I go to the notifications, I expect no notifications. First test done. All using the mouse. So we've shown kind of how you can visualize the app and how you can write simple tests, and we can probably get into building out our tests. Before I do that, I'm going to bore you with some more theory. There are two kinds of application outside of games. You basically, your basic kinds of app, you have your goal-based apps and habit-based apps. Goal-based apps are things like shopping, where people use them to achieve some kind of goal. In those instances, if you are trying to sell someone something, you want a reliable checkout process. You want someone to be able to get from the beginning of your journey to the end of your journey. And you want the variations on that journey. Your tests end up being a checkout process. A checkout process with multiple quantities, a checkout process with coupons or discounts, and all of those variations. Where, on the other hand, Blue Sky is a habit-based app. We would like, if I am Blue Sky, we would like you to come into our app and spend time there, spend your free time there. And the routes into the app are many, and there's no end goal. We just want all of the features to work. When you look at building tests, goal-based apps have longer tests and fewer of them, and there's repetition in there. Habit-based apps, like the one we're going to look at today, you test features in isolation, and you end up with far more tests over here, but they end up being shorter tests. I'm doing a habit-based one. If someone has questions about testing for goal-based apps, come find me on Slack. Happy to nerd about that for as long as you like. Right, so let's crack on. Let's have a search test. And again, we're going to pick blue sky. And again, we're going to go like that and go, I want to start in a nice clean state for every test. And so I'm going to run that. All that's going to do behind the scenes, launch app is going to stop the app and it's going to start the app again. So here we go. And then I'm going to come over here and I would like a search. What am I going to search for? I am going to do a bit of casual self-promotion. There was a React Native radio podcast episode recently that featured Maestro, and so I am going to search for that. So I want input text, but I don't want that because I'm a nerd. I know which episode number it was, and so I've done some tapping and some asserting in the first one. So far, I've done some tapping. Obviously, the taps are implicit assertions as well. You will get an error if those things can't be found. I've input text. Now, if we look at the screen says I can tap this to search. Now, writing your tests as a user would test always ends up with more reliable, more maintainable tests. If you have used this device and you have just typed this in, your thumb isn't going here. Your thumb is going to go for this at the bottom right-hand corner. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to do press key because that is how I would use the app. I mean, I do use this app. Right. So we're going to do a search. And there's Infinite Red's React Native Radio Podcast. It's cracking. So again, when we're talking about good test design, your good test design is about I want to reproduce the things that I would have done as a manual test case in Maestro. The value to me back when I was that person who picked Maestro for my automation strategy, back when I wore previous hats, the thing I liked is that I had hundreds of manual test cases and I would use Maestro to reproduce exactly those interactions like we were talking about there. So here, I don't know, my decision is that I wanted the thing from Infinite Red that talked about it. So it's just the avatar, maybe that's enough. And now that again, like with the last one, I can just run the test from beginning to end. Again, the maintainable tests there, again, one of the things that I quite value in these, as you'll notice that whilst we talked about IDs and text, I've picked text all the way through here. If you are vaguely familiar with Blue Sky, actually possibly if you're not, if you read this test from top to bottom, you actually know what this test is doing without having the app in front of you. If you fill this full of indirection, some people like page object model stuff, some people like lots of IDs. If you do that, your test becomes less readable. That's a preference of mine, but it's a hill I'll die on. Right, so there's a search test done, but that was a little bit easy. We probably want to do let's do a more complicated search. We'll call it advanced. It's not really advanced. And again, we're going to pick blue sky, and we're going to cheat by not doing that bit again. Let's go back. Let's steal some of this stuff. We're going to do a variation of this test. And right, so instead of searching for this, let's search for something a bit. People watching me type. Search for something a bit more general. And hope that someone is talking about Maestro Studio. So if I run this now, give it a second. Again, this is just a mirror of what's going on here. If you watch your emulator, the frame rate is slightly higher. You can see that this is copying this, but is a few seconds behind, as the typing as you're watching this will be slightly smoother. Right, so we've ended up here, but we've got a couple of messages here. No one's talking about Maestro Studio, so at this point we're going to need to scroll, and we've got scroll until visible. Now, again, talking about mimicking user actions, right? Scroll until visible works exactly as a user would do it. What we're doing in Scroll Until Visible. So let's put something in here. Maestro Studio Beta. I'm hoping this is going to work. Scroll works exactly as you would expect it to work. I am going to look on the screen for Maestro Studio Beta. Then I'm going to do a swipe from the middle up and move the content. Then I'm going to look again, and then I'm going to keep going until either I find the content or I time out after, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds. I don't remember what the default value is. Oh, that's something you can add more parameters down here to change that. So let's just run that line on its own. Again, that running one line on its own, like writing tests, I should say relatively easy. Maintaining your tests is the hard part, right? Maintaining your test, being able to run one line at a time to say, like, have I gotten this wrong? Has something changed? Being able to do that part of it. Yes. John.
Hey, Dan, a real quick interruption.
Yeah, go for it.
Seeing it might be a little hard for folks to see, if you could like zoom in on your screen or maybe see how
What
to
are we
make
looking
it.
for? So get a few more pixels that way. How's that looking? I'm wondering whether I can. I wonder if I can go for something like. How's that? Does that work better?
That's bigger.
Smash in. So we've come
We
to the
just
bottom.
can't see your emulator now, I don't think.
Because of the my face is in the way a little bit. Okay, I will shrink that up a little bit. Cool. So we've got a chap called John here who is talking about Maestro Studio Beta, but the element doesn't find Maestro Studio Beta. The reason for that is that we've got elements containing text, and so if I hover over here, the text of this, it's a whole text match, and this isn't Maestro Studio Beta. It's I've just been trying out Maestro Studio Beta and other nice things he's saying. So all of the text and ID selectors throughout Maestro, they are all going to be regular expressions. If I were to change this, now regular expressions, if you're nerdy, regular expressions are fun. I'm not going to cover too much on regular expressions, but it's all on the internet. If you want, if you care about going to town on it, I'd say again, maintainable tests, don't go to town on regular expressions. So if I just run this one line, and there we go, we can see that it doesn't need to scroll any further. We've got John's message there, and we can see people talking about Maestro Studio Beta. And so that's us for the second test written. There, third if you count that, the noddy one at the beginning. Right. So moving on, let's which one should we do next? Let's talk about profile stuff. So let's look at
a quick other interruptions here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good questions going on. The YouTube chat is hot. So a couple things. If you're writing using a using text instead of an ID, will it only work for a specific language? And then also, how do you scroll right to left?
Cool. So specific language.
People also answering these in the chat for them. But anyway, carry on.
In terms of specific language, all of your flows are structured in YAML. So whatever, Maestro doesn't care what is used in terms of what's on the screen. It's using device APIs to read the screen. If I hover right up here, I could do an assertion on Android's clock, or it's the presence of Wi-Fi, or things like that. The app is just rendering a bunch of things on the screen, and so long as your app does that, Maestro is going to work. The only requirement is that you have nicely structured YAML. For YAML nerds, this is one YAML file containing 2 YAML documents, and it's always specifically 2. The top half is configuration, and the bottom half is a list of commands. There's more configuration you can do here, so you can do things like give it a sensible name. But I think in terms of constraints, you're pretty much there. Scroll until visible is vertical scrolling. You can set your direction up and down, but given how trivial scroll until visible is, where you talk about it is swipe, assert, swipe, assert, swipe, assert until you run out of time, you could absolutely write a version of that it's simply swipe direction left or swipe in direction right, and then check for the presence of an element. And you could put that in a retry loop in Maestro or something like that. So like I think there's a recipe in the docs about doing exactly that kind of thing, about writing your own scroll until visible for things where you want to scroll inside a little fragment or something like that. So yeah, go and take a look. And if you hit any problems, come and ask me on Slack. Right, so we're gonna crack on with the next test, and we're gonna check some stuff in the sidebar here. So if I get myself back to a clean state, relaunching the app, uploads. Notice the flow completes before the UI is ready. However, you'll find that the next step won't start until the app is ready. So if we were to, what we've seen with the notifications tests, Maestro behind the scenes is waiting for your screen to become stable rather than trying to rattle through. You don't have loads of sleeps and waits and things like that. It's all kind of, I think we used to call it fluent back in the days of good Selenium tests. Again, blue sky, well done. We've got some text on the element with no text, so we can open drawer menu. Not only does that make it easy to access the element, but it also makes for nice readable tests. What do I want to do first? What am I expecting here? I'm expecting that my username is here. So let's insert that. Maybe for my tests, I have a set of test users. Hopefully not 1,015 test users, but maybe all I care about is that it starts with a demo test or something like that. So that's my first assertion. Again, using regular expressions to make sure that I'm making tests that are going to be rerunnable. And then we've got a bunch of other things here. So maybe we want to check that some of these are appearing. So let's assert on. There we go. Busy screen, not up there. Let's assert that chat is there. Let's also check on notifications and on feeds. And so we can say, like, I just want to check that these things are all here. If I run these, they're going to complete real quick. Bang, bang, bang. What you don't have there, though, is the ability to say, like, maybe there is a designer at Blue Sky who has knowledge of things and says we must always have chat above notifications, which is above feeds. So this is the order in which people want things, and we can do that. So we talked about how we could have text and IDs, and we can have. There's also a whole bunch of other properties you could have as part of an element selector. There's massive docs on that about like how you can pick an element, but this is just a shorthand for this. One of the other properties you've got is what's called relative position selectors. So I can say I want the text chat to appear above the text notifications. And so if I grab that, I can run that. And in one assertion, I get that this text and this text appears and that this text is above this text. Again, if I hover there, we can see like you're picking up screenshots. I can go into see details and see videos of my very tiny test. Again, you could, since that's you could split these out into multiple things, that chat is above notifications and notifications above feeds, but you can also compound the lot and say chat is above notifications, which is above feeds, and you can nest them all together and say, there we go. I can assert on my ordering in that way as well. And so you could do a lot of that. You could start talking about, well, if I go into my profile, then I want to know about my followers before my followings, and I want to, if you want to start getting into, I'm using Maestro to look at design stuff. There's enough in there that you could do quite a lot with your UI. Right. So when we talked about habit-based apps, we talked about not only about features, but also about how you get in there. Now, when I am wasting time in Blue Sky and in Reddit, my normal route in is not I have launched the app. My normal route in is that a friend of mine, it's normally Graham, sends me a link, and that is my way in. So let's test deep links. So let's go back here. We need a link to a message. What do we do? Yes, let's pick that one and go like that. And I'm going to copy that link. Right. And I'm going to have the open link. So all of these are in the insert command menu. I'm only writing them here because I know them. So I can open this link now. Again, when we talk about that kind of a range actor cert, what do we want to do in terms of setting the state, knowing the state of the app? If I were here, I might just assert on that, or I might choose to assert that I get to the React Native 341 message. For my preamble, I might decide I don't want to do anything because it should just work, or I might want to, what do you get when you first come in? Discover. Let's check that. So like I can get some kind of feed, and then I'm going to stop the app. And so if I run that from beginning to end, I'm going to show this one because it's going to be pretty quick. I'm going to open it. I'm going to see Discover, and then going to run the link, and then and we're in. We're done. And so that we have tested both the app's ability to receive deep links and to take you to the right place, or universal links. Sorry. Again, you could imagine that being a key objective for an app like Blue Sky. Right, we should probably do the one that everybody's expecting me to do, which is making a post. So again, we'll go back to the beginning. I quickly cheat and go back to the beginning here. Our next thing we are going to want to go and do, I want to do a new post. Then I want to input some text. Let's run that. And then I'm going to want the post button. And then success criteria, I want that one. Make sure I've got my, so thinking about manual tests. So I want to post a thing. I'm going to check it. Hopefully, if you're writing manual test cases, your manual test cases look better than this. And afterwards, I'm going to want to delete a thing, because if I'm using text like "Hello World," I want to delete it afterwards to make sure it then doesn't exist later. So for next time I run it. So I have posted, and check that I've posted. So where am I going to go? If I were using the app, I would either go to profile here, or I would go this way. And so I'm going to open the drawer menu. I think this is the way I would go. I would tap my profile and come in here. Then we could just assert on the text. Okay, that's nice. And then for deleting a message that I have normally just spotted a typo in, open the post options, delete a post, and delete. So we've gone through that, we've built it up step by step. However, when I run this all together, this is going to fail. And you'll see why in just a second. Let's watch it on the emulator just to make sure we catch it. So we go new post. We say we want hello world. We're then going to hit the post button. We're then going to see our little toast success message, and we're going to try and open the drawer menu, but the drawer menu doesn't work because the toast message was in the way. So the way we'd fix that assert visible we've got, again, it's one of those things that we were saying was fluent. It was going to wait for something to become visible. And in the same way, a certain not visible will wait for something to disappear, to become not visible. So we want to see the toast appear, and we want to see that toast message disappear again before we move on to the next command. If I run that now, we're going to write our post. We wait for the toast to disappear. Great. We can then open our drawer menu. Now this test is going to pass even though we've got two messages here. Again, so we haven't done enough to control state at the beginning. We could do a bunch of stuff like we could move our drawer menu test up to the top and then say, well, if the text hello world appears, then delete it, then start going through. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that you could do to make that a more stable test. And again, it's about controlling your state. We'll get on to in a second. We're about to drop into how we can use JavaScript inside our tests. Within the JavaScript, you can make API requests. You could go and delete all of my messages or something. So let's quickly get ourselves into a nice state for the next test. Right, so hello world is boring in terms of how test data works, in terms of and especially in terms of repeatable stuff. So why don't we? What makes a good message, a good social media message? Let's start talking trash about video games. That's the and we're going to use the Faker library behind the scenes that lives within the JavaScript implementation. I preferred the Faker.video game platform version. Right, now that we've changed that, what else do we need to change within our test? I preferred the, now I can put that here, but what I can't do is access the Faker things. If I put that down here, these are going to generate two random values. So for now, let's just say I prefer that. That's a good enough assertion for me. And we could probably, just to make sure our test doesn't hit the same thing again, assert not visible. I prefer that. Well, I want to make sure that's actually deleted. Right. So let's run that from the beginning. So we're going to relaunch the app. We're going to create a new post. And now let's see if I've remembered how to write. There we go. Yeah, that looks like trash talk about computer games that I see on the internet. Yes. Right. See the toast disappear. We'll open the drawer menu, and we're expecting these regular expressions to work. We've seen these work a bunch of times. And go through and delete it. Now, obviously, like just generating what is going to be one or two words with this platform, that's one thing. But what if we needed to generate something a bit more complicated? What we can do is say, I want to create a JavaScript file, and in there, I'm going to grab that, and this is going to solve. Oh, this is going to solve one of our other problems as well. I'm going to say output.platform. Now, output is a shared object within JavaScript. So JavaScript, we make sure you maintain isolation. So variables you declare here don't exist by the time you're here, so that bits of your test don't affect each other. That is unless you specifically use output and say, I want to attach to the output object a specific thing that I want to reuse later. And that will live for the entire lifetime of your test. So now that I've got that set up, I can grab that and I can replace it there. I'm going to need to run that script. So that script can run anywhere before I use it. So let's pop it under Launch App there. I want to run a script. I want to run gameplatform.js. And now that I've got that, and it's now a piece of text I've generated, I can even reuse it down there. relaunch the app. JavaScript took 0 time to run. Super trivial. You could see with something like that, you could make that a far more complicated piece of JavaScript. Like this is a big waste, but like you could make that, I want to build up a bunch of strings from a bunch of different fakery things, and I want to make an API request to go and find out if this already exists. Or you could like, you can go to town on that, but better is that when you read your test from top to bottom, all of that logic is abstracted, and the person reading and maintaining your test is still got a really good idea of exactly what's going on. Sega Saturn. Brilliant. Super. And so then with all of that abstracted, we are all the way to the end. Right. We are running out of time, and we are very quickly about to run into Q&A. But I want to show one more thing, if Jake will allow it. I want to show just interacting with the operating system for a second. So I'm going to show how I might launch the app all on my own. So we've got this, and this is a convenience function, right? But if I were a user and I were actually trying to launch the app myself, I would start like this, and I would end up here. And here I could still interact with all of the elements that are on the operating system. The next thing I'm going to do, I've used Android a bunch, so I know exactly the way I would get into my app menu. It's there on the home screen, but let's carry on this way anyway. I would swipe up to get the app launcher open, and I would tap on Blue Sky. If I were launching the app, that's the way I would go about it. And that becomes really useful in a whole bunch of different places. So where we talk about in the links thing, right? In the links thing, we know that we're going to receive a link. But what we could have done instead of opening the app is we could have come in here, swipe up. I'm going to long press on this, and then I'm going to go into app info. I'm going to scroll down until I get to open by default, and I'm going to validate before I try running my test that I've got the bsky.app and that again showing like these element selectors. I've got a checkbox there, and I can say I want to make sure that this checkbox is here, but I can also say I want it to be a checked checkbox. That's what I need. That's and so I've got a whole bunch of setup that I can do prior to that, and I can drive the operating system for anything that isn't like as a box with Maestro. And so whatever state is you need. Real quick, what else, before we get into questions, what else did I not show you? I didn't show you copying text from one screen to another. So I don't know, there's a bunch of things in here like being able to search for a post or find a post here and then bookmark it, and then I'm going into my likes or my saves or whatever, somewhere there's going to be a saved post. It's going to be in here, and being able to check for the same text again. So I've not done that. We haven't covered airplane mode and whether there's anything there. Faking the location, I've got no idea. Does Blue Sky show me French tweets if I set my location to Paris? We didn't do any API requests. We didn't do adding media. So we could have uploaded a picture onto the device and sent a message with a picture in it. We could have done orientation tests, and we could have done how you deal with animations when you're using Maestro. There's a bunch of stuff there. If I get a chance to do another hour, we could do a step 2. Right, you then get into the real world. I've created a bunch of stuff, and I've done this, kind of dead quick. There's a bunch of stuff here that we've put together that we then want to use elsewhere. So as this grows, I've created 7 tests, but like I've done this in 20, 25 minutes. Imagine how many tests you'd have if you spent like a day or a week making tests. You'd have 100. And so you start going, I want to start structuring for maintainability. And so I'm going to create a folder called tests. And in there, I'm going to put all of my tests. And the reason for that is because I'm also going to, probably going to end up with a few of these as well. And so I'm going to keep all my scripts separate. I'm going to shut that in there. And we haven't actually gotten to the point that these tests are really runnable in a CI system yet, because we cheated. We saved some time by not logging in every time, but we actually do want to be able to log in. But we want to log in on all of them, because we want all of our tests. Like you don't want to run I want to run test 1, then test 2, then test 3. I want to be able to test them all completely independently, because I'm going to want to maintain them independently. If I end up with 15 tests and I need to maintain test 15, I do not want to run tests 1 through 14 to get there. So what I'm going to do is, you've got the concept of subflows in Maestro. I'll call them partials, just to sound like a normal human. And we will create a login in here. And we can leave launch app in there. Maybe if every test is using it, let's do that. So let's run this, and we're going to end up in our completely blank state, which is how you'd want to start every test anyway, really. And we go and we sign in. Username is already populated, so let's input some text, and then we'll tap on the password field. We're going to want to input some more text. Pop my password in there, and then we want that. So where are we? We're going to go back. Let's just check all of that works. We tap on sign in. There's a username. There. Tap on password, enter the password. Tap on next. And there's that same home screen that we've seen everywhere else. Great. So what that means is, if I go for my simple test now, instead of this, we would have run flow out of the tests folder into the partials folder and call my login.yaml. More than that, I can also do an onFlow start hook up at the top. So that means then that this is stuff that I need in order to get my test going. This is what I actually care about. I can separate that out, and I can go and start copying that into all of my different tests and making sure that they're all in the same way. Get rid of that. And I'm into a state now where I'm starting to feel like I could put this all in GitHub, and I could start either. Maybe I make a GitHub action and I launch an Android emulator and I install my Blue Sky APK, and then I can use the Maestro CLI and I can run all of these tests. And when it's 7, that's going to be fine. When it's 70, you're going to be waiting a while. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you can use Maestro Cloud, like a bunch of other companies do. You can use Maestro Cloud. If you've got 70 tests and you say have 10 devices, then you're going to run in about the length of 7 tests each rather than 70, and you're going to get your feedback faster, which is probably what you want. But absolutely, Maestro Cloud is not a requirement of using any of this software. This is if you want to limit the number of tests you can tags, and you can start doing things like, I only want to run the tests within this folder, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do in order to limit that number as well. I think that's everything. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm hoping that perhaps there's a couple of questions come in. Jake, flip back to...
Yeah, the questions are just flowing. It's so awesome to see so many people asking questions. We've got Simon in there answering a ton, and a lot of people from the community, I can tell, also helping answer stuff. So one that I've seen asked like 4 or 5 times is physical device support. That's one I can answer.
I mean, straight away, I'd say Android physical device support is there straight away. So the way the emulator works is it's all working over ADB. There's a helper app, both iOS and Android. There's a helper app that sits on device side that helps with some of those instructions. iOS, some of Maestro still relies on like symctl commands under the hood, and so iOS device support isn't there yet.
Working on it.
Yeah.
My general update on physical device support. A lot of the code is complete from chatting with my co-founder. We're trying to hire somebody right now, actually, if you know anybody, to kind of help handle our infrastructure for running Maestro. So that's something we can drop as well, the job rec there. But our goal is to have something early next year for physical device support, and like specifically for the iOS side as well. So we plan to cover both, and definitely working on it. Definitely a top priority for us. Just small team juggling a lot here. So anyway, that's one. So hopefully give some context to folks. If you have any questions, you can always follow up with us just at hello@mobile.dev. All right, another one, Dan. There's been so many questions in the YouTube chat, but so I'm just kind of trying to pull out themes. A lot of questions around reducing delays on taps. Do you have any advice on handling taps, optimizing taps, things like that?
Yes, so there's some stuff in the docs about how you wait for the app to settle. So there's some stuff you can do where the defaults for taps are that you will wait a maximum of so much time, because what you don't want to happen is, imagine you've got some sort of horizontal screen transition going on. So I tap a button and then that screen for the next thing comes in. And so I want to tap this thing on this screen, and I want to tap this thing on this screen. And what you don't want to do is try and hit a tap as the screen is moving in. And so there's the ability to wait for the app to settle. If you have a look in the docs for tap on, you can reduce the numbers down and say, no, I don't have any screen transitions. I've used my ADB settings to disable all my animations and transitions. And so I'm really confident I can just go bang, 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 bang. And you can do that. You can tweak that down. I think there's probably more that we could do in terms of Maestro source code to perhaps optimize for how we detect that sort of stuff. There's if anybody else has ideas, I mean, it's all open source, it's all there on GitHub. If people have ideas on how to make that even faster, PR is very welcome.
Love it. Okay, another theme of questions I'm seeing is folks, trying to optimize their time, and around, if I write, what are some tips for, hey, if I'm writing an Android test that looks pretty similar to an iOS test, what are some things I should do? Maybe some tips on using subflows, things like that.
Good. So, I've done a bunch of tests for React Native apps in the past, where you're writing in one place and you're going to build for both platforms, and they're pretty similar, but they're not exactly the same. So we covered a little bit of using run flow to call that login piece there. Run flow has the ability to either take a file or can take a list of commands. It also has the ability to take conditions. So you can say run flow when the platform is iOS, tap on this button, and then run flow when it's Android, tap on that button, because there's just slightly different selectors for the button. Maybe one of them's got an ID, or one of them's got slightly different text for reasons or whatever. So you can do that. I'd say start thinking about your future self, right? If your test starts getting ugly with loads of that all the way through, do 2 tests. You can control execution with tags and say, when I run my iOS tests, don't run my Android only tests, and when I run my Android things, don't run my iOS only, or whichever way you want round you want to tag it and include it. But I would duplicate it if you think that maintainability is going to become a hassle. Other than that, I'm normally like it's one app, it's one feature, it's one test.
Nice. All right. What's another one? There's been a lot of questions around like mocking, and just maybe like a general perspective on data mocking.
So Maestro is intentionally high level, right? If you've used Playwright before, it's a higher level than that, right? I don't care about your CSS selectors. I don't care about that. Like you are looking at the stuff that is presented on the screen. And so we've never really gone into data mocking and things like that because it's kind of someone else's problem, right? If you want to run with a proxy, if you go and look at Blue Sky's tests in GitHub, they use data mocking, presumably because they don't want to open source some credentials or something like that. They use data mocking in all of their tests, and so their test is just stand up a data mock and then crack on and run the rest of your tests, right? You can absolutely do that. It's not out of the box with Maestro, but like loads of folks have that need, especially when you're thinking about third-party integrations and things like that. Or I've got a dev environment or a staging environment that's got almost all of the components. Like there are good reasons to want data mocking. I would say though, on the flip side, one of the benefits of having Maestro is that it is as real as it can be without actually having human thumbs to do it all, right? And so data mocking reduces your realism of your test. And so consider if you really need it before like going whole hog down that path.
Awesome. Great analysis there. What's the next area of things? Oh, organizing your tests, like folder structure
So
tips.
I went into a little bit of that just at the end there, where I started kind of going like, what would I want to see if I were coming to a repository? I've got my tests folder. These are the executable things. And then I've got a partials folder. These are the non-executable things where I'm going to store my other things. I talked really early on about habit-based and goal-based apps. Where you have your goal-based apps, where you have fewer longer tests, you will always use more partials than you will in your habit-based apps, because your habit-based apps, you're testing a feature and most of the test is then important and it's not set up. Whereas in your goal-based apps, you might end up trying to abstract pieces of functionality like add to basket and things like that, like those sorts of things, and so that your test then becomes more readable rather than being 400 lines of YAML. So where you're structuring, you then start maybe ending up with a subfolder structure under your partials, or maybe you start some of your partials creep into your tests folder, but use tags to make sure they're not run and things like that. Comes down to what works for you and your team. Some folks I've seen even have their Maestro tests co-located, dotted through their code the same way that unit tests are, and just then filter it out when it comes to execution at runtime. So maybe they'll that's good for maintainability, but they'll take all the YAML out, and then like if they're using Maestro Cloud, they'll upload just the YAML, but maintaining that same folder mirror. So I mean, like, it's a horrible tester answer, but it depends. But I've given you like an idealized version there, just at the end there. And everything I've done today, I'll tidy up. I'll pop it in GitHub somewhere, so that everybody can see that kind of what I've done. You don't have to go scrubbing through a video to go see it.
Nice. Yep. And those kinds of things, to those watching, we have a little QR code here. Our Slack community is great. We have like, I don't know, 6,000 people in there, a lot of Maestro users. It's always just like those types of strategy questions on organizing and using Maestro as effectively as possible. There's a great community of people who can always provide help along with our team.
There's
So just a plug
There's
there.
definitely a good bunch of folks there as well for that kind of Maestro Plus, I need help for running Maestro in a situation like I use Circle CI and Maestro. You'll find someone who's already doing that. Kind of it's not all going to come from our docs. It comes from other people who've got the kind of hard-won experience.
That is the power. It's the power of open source. Okay. Another question that's coming up a lot is related to AI, and maybe we can do a little bit of what's available. I think not a lot of people know there is a MCP for Maestro.
Yep.
And you can, use flavor of your IDE LLM tool, like plug it into Cursor, Claude Code, whatever it may be, and help you with, provide MCP provides context on Maestro to your LLM, and then you can use your own account to help you with generating test cases. It even has some ability to debug a test. This is a service that's still, something we're working on, but tons of people already are using it today.
I've had some good results using it, but I'd say my results are directly proportional to how well I wrote my manual test case at the beginning, right? So the MCP can, the ability to generate some YAML and then run it by running the Maestro CLI, like that is boringly easy. But the ability to be able to interpret what it was you actually wanted in your test. So I find that even with very rushed ones, I can get 75% of the way there. I can go through the search and I can get to the thing, but I need to go back through and add good assertions in to make it a good and valuable test. I don't just want to reach the end. I want to know that I hit all the right points along the way. There's a couple of AI commands in Maestro, some assert with AI. Honestly, they're fine. I think we will do some other work in that area. Like people are finding that AI is good as small task blocks, and I think we're at roughly the right level with those. However, everybody who uses them, some people are getting on well, some people are finding that like it's fine, but it's limited. For instance, people say like there's no tap with AI. Tap on the blue thing. Like that's a hard problem that AI could help with that we don't have yet. But yeah, there's plenty of scope there to go further.
Nice. Yeah. Check out the MCP. I mean, tell us about your experience, what you've been able to do using it, because we've been hearing a lot of cool stories lately. Okay, I feel like that wraps up the general themes, and we're at time here. So Dan, there's no doubt I'm seeing there's a desire for more sessions like this for sure.
I mean, I'd be interested again in terms of comments, what people want from a second session. Like I could do the same thing for a goal-based app, or we could look at what a more advanced version of this would be, whether would a demo of Maestro Cloud and how we go about integrating what we've done into something CI-ish. Like this is really good fun. I love chatting about Maestro. So let us know what it is you want in terms of video sessions.
I've seen some folks interested in web. I think folks interested in like wiring this up in CI, what that can look like, maybe a little more advanced.
So yes, all of those, please.
Yeah, those are the general ones I've been seeing. So anyway, we'll leave it there. If there's a question that we didn't get answered, like we were saying, join, if you're open to it, join our Slack, or you can always just message us directly at hello@mobile.dev. We're a small team. I pretty much look at everything and get back to people. So happy to kind of talk through requirements or things that might be challenging y'all. But yeah, I mean, thanks everyone for being here. We had like 300 plus people watching, which is pretty incredible. So it's just humbling to see all the folks, and yeah, we'll see y'all soon. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.